Welcome to On Time in Full, a podcast from Designed Conveyor Systems.
Welcome to a special roundtable edition of On Time in Full. I'm your host, Yasmin Hassan. Today, I'm joined by Scott Singer from Designed Conveyor Systems and Steve Downey from Cleveland Clinic to discuss the future of healthcare supply chains. Hospital groups are really rethinking distribution. New technology has been making waves, and really patient needs are shifting. So what does all of this mean for supply chain leaders? Well, go nowhere, because today we are breaking it all down, exploring the latest innovations, strategies, and the changing world of healthcare logistics. Steve, kick things off for us. Tell us a little bit about your background. And I feel like everyone knows the name Cleveland Clinic, right? But can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Let's start with myself, and then we'll get into some depth about Cleveland Clinic. I have always been about healthcare from the beginning of my career. I'm an electrical engineer, but figured patient care was the best place and worked the full spectrum of healthcare. Did med device, did third-party logistics, the GPO side, and now provider. So lots of perspectives on healthcare supply chain and how the wheel turns, how all the cogs fit together. It's been eye-opening and I think an advantage to help connect those dots. And when I'm trying to do something in the healthcare supply chain, it helps me understand why something won't work if I'm asking a manufacturer to do something they were never geared up to be able to do. So let's talk Cleveland Clinic, and it's about patient care. We're known around the world for it. We celebrated our 100-year anniversary a few years ago. We are about the hard care. It's quaternary care for when you really need the experts. There's 83,000 caregivers, 23 hospitals, about almost 300 outpatient facilities around the world. We have concentrations in Ohio, Florida, and sites in Canada, Nevada, London, and Abu Dhabi. So global health system with a lot of sites, a lot of scale. We're about 15 billion in total revenue and 15 million in patient encounters, nonprofit healthcare. And really, I'll tell you, the secret sauce to all that is a team of teams. We act and behave like our original founders, who were 4 doctors that served together in World War I. They recognized each of them brought strengths, so they brought team-level care. That was unique for the time, and we still have a team of teams philosophy. In the shortages of today's supply chains, it's not, Steve, why didn't you have enough? Why aren't your par levels good enough? Why didn't you manage that vendor better? It's, oh, well, this is awkward. Now we have to go figure out how to deal with this shortage. What can we do to help? And perhaps we need to adjust something in practice somewhere, or I need some clinical support, or I need communication or marketing, whatever it is. Everybody's like, just get together on a call. It may be a big call, but we together figure out how to solve the problem. And that works the same on patient care. If you need something, you have a team. And I heard a physician say it the other day. He was in the middle of a talk and he showed his pager and he said, hold on, I just want everybody to know, if this goes off, I'm going to drop everything and leave this talk because somebody needs me. And that's a powerful statement when you're in front of a room of hundreds of people that, like, no, you all are not the most important thing. It's the person at the other end of this pager that is doing patient care that matters the most. That's our culture. That's what we live with. That's what I feel every day.
That's incredible, Steve. Everyone seems to know the name Cleveland Clinic. And now Steve Downey, the CSO of one of the major healthcare supply chains in the world. My name is Scott Singer. I'm an account executive at DCS. I work in the systems integration world and help bring knowledge to those around in the healthcare industry of what current events are and what we should see in the future. That's what we're here to learn today from Steve Downey and Cleveland Clinic, to understand where we've been and where we're going, what the pressures are on the global supply chain, both domestically and internationally. So over the past 10 years, a lot has changed. We've seen hyperinflation. We've seen tariffs come and go. We've seen a lot of pressure on global supply chain. COVID, as an example. Patient care has changed. What patients have expected over the past 10 years has drastically changed. And Steve, so what we're going to see is change in the future, obviously. So as one of the leaders, that's what we want to glean some light from you. Understand, what do you see as one of the critical and most demanding changes on the global healthcare supply chain?
I today talk about it as modern, agile, resilient, global, and efficient. Marge. And it will still be Marge in the future. But let's talk in each one of those segments. So modern, we are on the curve of AI and automation. There is so much initiative on that front, so much potential. I don't even think we recognize it. We're doing things like large language model tests, robotic process automation, agentic AI, figuring out how you can supplement work with just fast information. Think about sourcing. We have our contracts in one repository, and I can ask a large language model question over that. What are all my contracts that have my standard terms for shipping that expire in the next 3 months? And yes, you have to engineer that question right. But when you ask that question, you get a very cohesive answer. Or how does this contract compare to my standard terms? Those are new tools, which also means you have to have the workforce trained properly on how to handle those. And we are always looking for how do we do this new, better. Lots of health systems are on that curve. The first come on patient care. How do you do imaging differently? How do you do ambient listening for physicians? But it applies in the supply chain just as well. I think the other one is material automation and robotics. And we were the other day in a robot company looking at how they'll navigate crowded hallways and using AI and robot brains for learning across different models. Think about universal workers who can move material from one place to another as a robot. They don't care what they're carrying. They'll carry your linen or your food or your supplies or whatever it is. And in today's world, you have workers doing a lot of that. Is that really the best use of their brains? Probably not. And I'd rather have them walk next to the patient, providing care and information and making sure they feel comfortable where they're going than having to push the wheelchair. So I think we're heading in that much more modern stage. And you fast forward 5 years, it'll be way more modern. On the agile front, I think that's about the data side, getting the data in the right place, executing it quickly, making sure you're distilling from what it's telling you fast. Things like control towers, right? That was very common in logistics to have monitoring of how everything is going across all your transportation. Why don't you just fix it for me? If I'm monitoring with a control tower how my sterile processing is staffed and have my supplies, and I input the surgery schedule for the next 6 weeks, just tell me where I'm going to be short staffed and go text the leader of that site that they need up their staff for next Tuesday. It's a control tower acting on the data that's helping you solve problems agile. It's not hard to imagine that leap. It's really hard to execute that leap, but it's not hard to imagine that that's where we'll be heading. On the resilient side, supply shortages has been common, and many folks during COVID learned what supply chain really did, right? But supply shortages are still common. It's way too common. We have a lot of programs around supply risk management. Healthcare is taking that one step further to third-party risk management. What are in your supplier base? What are the risks to those suppliers overall? There were a severe increase in cyber breaches, increases in let's say, clauses required for that. The requirements on that front are so stringent that if you have a breakdown from a supplier and you can't get products, now you've got a real patient care problem. And if you rewind back 2 or 3 years, we had maybe 1 or 2 a year. In 2024, 37 times against our suppliers. Imagine 5 years from now, that's hundreds, if we continue at that scale, hundreds of times that we've got issues with our supply chain because of third-party risk. So we went to other industries and said, who's really good at third-party risk? Banking. Banking is really good at securing risk. Your money needs to be in one place and secure. How do they do it? Well, there's a lot of regulations, but there's a lot of controls around working together, supply chain, legal, AP, cyber, and you're interconnected. If legal isn't comfortable with an agreement, but supply chain is, maybe there's some other controls you can put in place, or you go re-audit that supplier. Or cyber says, I need you to do something different before we enact that contract, or we're going to have some buffer layer, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a company had a breach. We're not going to allow the sales rep with their USB drives on site. And it's managing that sort of interconnectivity. That's the next layer of it. We're going to get better at that. On the global side, being a global health system, we now think the right product for the world. And most healthcare is not set up that way. It's set up in geographies. We think if we choose the best, whatever it is, pacemaker or whatever it is, and as long as it's available in those countries, we should be able to have that level of care in that country. So we think now more at global scale. Now, times the regulatory bodies are at different stages of approval, so we work through that. But we do try to manage it with having the same systems and the same processes and everything globally. And I guess last, but by far not least, is efficient. You're not a supply chain if you're not worried about costs. And today's world of healthcare, there is so much pressure on health systems with cost. Labor has increased, supply costs have increased, pharmacy costs have increased, and our margins shrink because your reimbursement doesn't change very much. So you have a flat cap on the top and everything rising towards it. So what you'll see is a lot of health systems orienting to how do we bend that curve? How do we partner differently with our supply base? And that is a very different conversation. Partner, drive cost out. And then the other one I'll mention there is centralization and standardization. We're on a big lean initiative. A lot of health systems don't want to use clinical space for operational functions. Do I have a warehouse, laundry, commerce kitchen, sterile processing? Why are those taking up space in my very valuable real estate in an ASC or a hospital? Can I just centralize that somewhere and serve a geography? And if you can do that, it means central warehouses, larger scale, more automation in the warehouse, get that in a constant service out to the sites, small or large, that you have regular truck runs, regular deliveries, more automation on either side of it to reduce cost. But it's centralized away from having disparate everything. It used to be health systems had laundry in all their sites. And it's crazy to think, instead of having a central laundry where you send everything, wash it, send it back, that we used to take up all that real estate for laundry. No more.
That's incredible, Steve. I know Cleveland Clinic has invested a lot in technology to understand how they can enhance their continuous improvement to get better, to continually put pressure on the supply chain for yourselves to see how you can enhance your operations. I know in my career at DCS, that's what we do consistently, is to understand how we can make investments to help our clients become better. One of those more recent ones for us is Datum, our proprietary warehouse execution software system that people are really enjoying, right? It is the ability to get real-time reporting, modular design, the ability to have secure and enhanced code to allow to make sure with all these different attacks that we're seeing on different supply chains and systems to everything in knowledge, especially in the healthcare industry, that there is security protocols in place. So I know that Cleveland Clinic invests heavily in understanding who the leaders will be in their supply chain. Do you see that as a major competitive advantage, having a seat at the table, to be able to be one of the executive leaders, to have insight to say the supply chain is no longer secondary thought? It's no longer just moving boxes. It's actually a place where we can enhance and be in a competitive advantage across the industry.
It's a great question, Scott, because we think of it as a competitive advantage. Not all health systems do, but our C-suite's smart enough to recognize that. And I think the good supply chains and the good health systems do. It's an enabler of care. Major costs that the health system face are supplies and people. So you have to be very strategic in managing both. And a well-run supply chain can generate income. We have programs and services you can offer to other health systems, for example. So that program is a very strategic one. In fact, our group purchasing organization, it's a joint venture. As we work with other health systems, it's a common conversation of, do you want to have the Cleveland Clinic name on the side of your building as a connected care facility, or perhaps leverage our supply spend as part of our GPO? Those are strategic conversations. We believe that the supply chain is the enabler of care. And it's a clinically driven supply chain. It needs to be based in clinical evidence. We have clinical and non-clinical spend, but your clinical spend needs to be driven by the clinicians, and there's a process for that. And then the role of supply chain is standard setting and measuring. There may be clinical variations. Taking care of Scott may look different than taking care of Yasmin, but for X procedure, there's a process, and then you allow clinical deviations and you report. And that way, you have consistent product on the shelf, consistent ways to provide the care. You figure out what is the best way to do X procedure, and then you do that clinically. Well, doesn't it make sense that doing that clinically uses the same thing? Because if they all use something different, then how is it standardized, right? That's the whole idea. And that way, you're also monitoring risk and controlling risk. So across all of that, it sounds very strategic. I think of it as cost, efficiency, and use. As you manage your supply chain, there's always the cost component. You are working with your suppliers, you're redoing contracts, you're bidding and auctioning and looking at what is the product cost itself. That is strategic, it's sourcing, it's a component of your spend. Then you go to efficient. It needs to get to the right place the best possible way. Make sure you're managing your full scope of spend. Are you managing all your indirects? If you're not managing the indirects, like your IT spend, your marketing, legal, people, you have leakage in your spend all over the place. At the clinic, we manage more than 90% of our spend. That's an incredible number, and it requires a lot of resources, but you're controlling and negotiating all of that. What about waste, right? If I'm getting product for a supply chain, let's say we get it to the OR and they opened everything and we just ended up throwing it away. What good was that? That doesn't help anybody. Nobody wants that. So make sure you're only using what you need. Are you getting it there the most efficient way? A number of health systems just overnight everything. That's not the best way, and nor do the manufacturers want everything overnight. It puts pressure on their supply chains. So the efficient use, doing better demand planning, doing CPFR with your suppliers, having waste reduction programs or lean programs. There's a lot of fruit in that. SKU rationalization efforts. You could go on and on about ways to be more efficient, that you're not just saying, let's pay less for this. It's how do we do that better? And then last is use. How do we make sure you're using the right amount? The clinical practices maybe use 3 pieces of bone cement here, but this doctor was trained to use 6. What's the right answer? Is it 3 or 6? So if you think about your utilization and you set those standards and you talk to your physician teams about, we think this is the right answer, great. Right? Now you've controlled your utilization better. I think that applies really well in indirect spend. Think about waste pickup. That's a great example. If I negotiate the most efficient pickup of a garbage can, great. Now, if that garbage collector comes every 2 hours, it's going to be really expensive. If they come once a week, much, much smarter, right? Did you leave me the right size container for once a week? Or maybe I generate so much trash that I need 3. Okay. I'd rather have 3 and you come once a week than me just have a small one and you come every day. It's the use equation that really matters. And folks often forget that, but there's a dial there and you can turn that dial usually in partnership with your vendor to understand the dial. They may guide you towards a daily trash pickup because they think that would be best for them. But you're like, okay, that's a dial. I'm going to adjust that. On the cost efficiency use curve, I find use to be the biggest savings. That's the one where if you got your cost right, you got your efficiency right, and then you fine tune your use, now you're really hitting your supply budget. You have to do that by using the right levels of risk. As I said, doing third-party risk management, supply risk management, good demand planning. You have to measure your risk, make sure you're buying the right stuff. And you have to have talent in your team. You can't do all this with horrible people who don't work as a team, who aren't responsive, who don't work well with their customer base. Could you imagine if I was meeting with clinicians and they got the data wrong and they were like, I don't really care what you have to say, doctor. I'm just here to check a box. What do you want? Like, that would not work, right? You need skilled people who can work with your stakeholders, understand their needs, speak their language, translate that into supply chain, figure out how to translate that with the suppliers. That takes a really smart and talented group. So you have to build your workforce, train them, enable them with the right tools, make sure they're valued. All those are building up the supply chain talent in, frankly, a world where supply chain talent isn't all that common. We're all stretched for that.
That's great, Steve. And thank you for that. It's always interesting to learn from you all, the leaders of the global healthcare supply chain industry. And that's one thing I want people to take away and understand from this is that supply chain is critical in the industry. It's a value add. It's no longer something that can be thought of as just a historical moving boxes environment. The teams and leaders that are going to be at the forefront will be ones that take supply chain very seriously, allow them to be in the C-suite, a seat at the table, working with partners that understand the industry well and taking insight and heeding that advice from those partners. One last question, Steve, that I like to ask everyone. What keeps you up at night? What are you thinking about that is critical that you have to stay ahead of in the future to make sure that you can continue to be successful and to be a leader in the industry?
Having products in the right place. And we spend a lot of time and effort figuring out what are the right products, getting into the right place, making sure it's available clinically. But I'll tell you a story. There was a young boy who was working on a farm and had a farming accident and severed some fingers in his hand. And that was much, much more than the local hospital had ever dealt with. And it needed a lot of product, much more than they would normally have kept. So what do? That health system, it's like, help, right? We need help. We're doing the surgery as fast as we can do this. It's going to be at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. I need everything I can possibly get there. And this was many years ago, but I was involved and the team said, product is coming from Nevada. How are we going to get product from Nevada to Pennsylvania for 6 a.m.? Now, all of you logistics folks are like, that's hard.
Yeah.
This was about 8 o'clock at night, because you don't happen to have farming accidents at the right time of day that give you plenty of leeway. It was run. And our warehouse folks ran through the warehouse to get product, literally running, scoop it off the shelf into a box, run at the door. One of the other workforce had their truck idling and they raced over to the FedEx depot. We called one of the top executives at FedEx and said, coming in hot and we're going to need help here. They held a plane. You know what it takes to hold a FedEx plane? That is not a normal thing. Air traffic control and flight patterns and receiving and everything. FedEx holds the plane. We get it through and onto the plane. They get it there the next morning. Worker meets it to get it off the plane direct to the hospital. That's another hard trick, to get something straight off the plane. They get it off the plane to the hospital. It gets there for the surgery, and the boy's hand is saved. That is supply chain heroics. You don't want to have to do those, but it happens. And I bet if you ask any hospital supply chain person, they'll tell you some story like that. We just shared another one from our same experience a few months ago. The anticipating that need and making sure it happens, having the right product in the right place. You don't want to have to be the hero like that. You do it because you care about the patients. You'll go the extra mile, but you don't want to have to. That keeps me up, just making sure I have it ready for the patient.
That's an incredible story, Steve. And I'm glad you were the hero that day. But that's our goal, right? Is to make sure that we have the right product in the right place at the right time. And the more that companies like Cleveland Clinic and yourself, as you had mentioned, work with your partners, that helps us better understand where that product should be. I know here at DCS, we work extensively on our warehouse execution system, Datum, to make sure that all the visibility and reporting is there, using those AI tools, partnering with AI companies to say, okay, where should product be at what location based on past demand and potentially future demand as well. It's been great, Steve. Very much appreciate your time today. It's fantastic information from a leader in the industry, and I hope that we can hang out and talk soon.
And I feel like sharing these stories it's so important so other people can hear how you figured it out, because unfortunately, these sorts of problems do seem to come up and they're not as unique as we would like them to be.
Exactly right, Yasmin.
Well, I feel like this discussion really just shows how fast the healthcare supply chain is evolving. And it really all comes down to innovation and adaptability. And that really just seems to be the secret to staying ahead. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for sharing all of your insights. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of On Time in Full. If you enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll enjoy the next one. Tune in.